Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, welcome back to the podcast and thanks for tuning in to this interview with Steve Hall. The original plan was to discuss both training and nutrition in a single episode, but in the end we dedicated the whole episode to training. Therefore, to your delight, there will be a part 2 all about nutrition releasing in a couple of weeks' time as soon as we recorded it. For now, enjoy part 1. Yo, dear listeners, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have with me Steve Hall, coming back for the third time, I believe, at this point. Is that right, Steve?
Oh, you know better than me, but it sounds about right. Yeah, I appreciate being invited on again. Third time's a charm is what they say, right?
Yeah, the first time we talked about muscle building phases. Then you came back for mini cuts. And this time I want to talk to you about topics that are related to training and nutrition that you've changed your mind about over the years. And I want to give the audience some perspective on why I'm specifically asking you. And I think a good idea as to where to start to give that perspective is to ask you, how long have you been training yourself and how long have you been coaching other people?
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about how much time I've now been training because almost more than half my life has been towards training. I actually started going to the gym. I know this because our gym, I don't know if they still have this rule, but you couldn't be 16. You had to be, 16 to train in the gym with the weights. And I wasn't quite 16. So I'd be like, yeah, my birthday's like next week. But I was 15 years old when I started. And so now at the age of, very shortly, 34 years old. So it's been over 15 years training in the gym consistently with a little bit of setback at one point, but mostly pretty consistent. And now I've been, and did you say coaching? So I've actually, I started, I was a one-on-one personal trainer in 2014. So I was doing a little bit of coaching before that, but not like, it wasn't my full-time gig. So I've almost been officially kind of in the fitness industry full-time for, a decade this year, basically. It would have been just over a decade now, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I'm slowly becoming one of the older people in the industry and in natural bodybuilding in a sense.
One of the mature people.
Mature sounds better. Wise,
Exactly, the gurus of the fitness industry. And that explains exactly why I wanted to have you on, because you have about 19 years of training under your belt and 10 years of coaching. I'm sure you've changed your perspective several times over the years over these topics that we're going to discuss.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Yeah, it makes me think of the do you know the midwit meme?
Yes.
Yes, it kind of, in some senses, some of it relates to that midwit meme where it's like, hey, where I started is almost where I've come back to in some sense with some things, but much more nuanced than when I first started going to the gym, that's for sure.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, you start and you just don't know enough, but then you come back to the original point with just some extra nuance. And you're like, it was right, just not because for the reasons I thought it was.
Yes.
Fair enough. So then, to start with, I am going to touch on the training related topics. And the first one I have is, how have you changed your mind, if you have, about set volume for hypertrophy?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting because I think I didn't think about volume at all in my lifting career up until the point, I think it was Birnbaum was the author on the paper, which is really quite old now. I can't, and no one references it anymore, but that was the paper that was referenced. And I think Eric Helms was the person within the fitness industry, within the evidence-based space that started talking about it. And this was like talking about optimal set volume, sorry, not set volumes, volume of hypertrophy. And I think he actually talked about kind of sets times reps was
Mm-hmm.
the way that he was looking at volume at that time, which is not a great way to look at it, I don't think, because obviously if it's sets times reps, anything high rep is going to be like way more volume. And, so he was kind of talking about optimal volume in that regard. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think I came across, it talks about more specifically from Greg Nuckols from Stronger by Science, and he was starting to talk about, and I don't believe that he is the original like author to the article that was written, and I can't remember the title of the article, but I think it was someone through Stronger by Science, and I always credit Greg Nuckols for it, so he has to then credit the person who actually wrote it. But they started talking about hard sets, and so that's when it was like, oh, actually, we find out that if you're lower rep, higher rep, that doesn't matter so much, so long as you're close enough to failure, and then that equals a hard set. So long as you're proximal to failure at 25 reps or 5 reps or 15 reps, that one hard set is almost equivocal for hypertrophy, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
On a very basic level, that seems to hold true. So that's when it started shifting in that direction. And then I think I guess I'm not in the scientific kind of field to the extent that I make research papers and I kind of help co-author them or anything like this. So I don't know, but it seems that people started to move down that direction of, okay, set volume seems to be the more important thing. It's not volume load, kind of sets times reps times load, or sets times reps. It seems to be actually just hard sets seem to be the thing that is important for growth. And I think to some extent, some people start just equating one hard set as any other hard set. So as long as you were like within 4 reps to failure, that was equivocal to like 0, 1, 2, 3 RL. That's obviously evolved, and we'll probably talk about that a bit. But so this is what led me to then talk about sets and set volume. So it's only been a relatively recent thing within maybe the last 5 years or so where people
Mm-hmm.
have started talking about kind of hard sets for hypertrophy. And I think along that time with volume and its relationship to hypertrophy, there's always been a pretty much underlying understanding that there seems to be a causative relationship. So the higher volumes you can do and recover from seems to be leading to more and more growth. And it's just the body of evidence has grown and grown and grown. Like paper after paper after paper have come out. I think the latest one, actually, I'm not sure it's even the latest, but it's the latest one that's on many people's minds. I think it was from Enos et al. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the kind of up to 52 sets for quads for hypertrophy. And they just seem to get more and more gains from this. And obviously, there's lots of context and nuance behind that. And during that kind of period of time, as that volume research was growing, someone who really helped cement my understanding of training volume was Mike Israetel, and he would talk about the volume landmarks. And it was such a great framework for thinking about this, where you have everything from, okay, this per muscle per week, how much volume do you need to maintain, and then how much do you need to just about grow, so minimum effective volume. Then what's your maximal adaptive volume? How much volume can you do in terms of sets and grow the most from? And then eventually, with accumulative fatigue and everything like that, you'll hit your max recoverable volume. This is the most you can do and repeat on a week to week basis. And then, hey, we probably have accumulated so much fatigue, we need to maybe deload, and that sort of kind of relationship started coming through. So the relationship between volume and fatigue and stimulus fatigue ratios, this kind of concept really started to be built through Mikey's return. I think he actually came out with maximal recoverable volume, and that was like his thing. And then he went on Jeff Nippard's podcast, I believe, and had a debate with people like Lane Norton were there and other big figureheads within the industry. And he started to think about it a bit deeper. And then I think it was Eric Helms that pushed him to talk about things like minimum effective volume and then maximal adaptive volume, which I think were just great additions to that understanding. So for a while with my training, I would try and follow this paradigm of let's start a mesocycle at minimum effective volume. So we know we're growing, but we've got more to give. And then we can kind of progressively overload and overload via sets, which was like Mike kind of revolutionized the space. We're talking about that sort of thing. And that I first learned about from his book, what was it called? The Scientific Principles of Strength Training. That was where it was first kind of talked about, where it's like, hey, you don't just have to add like load or reps, and obviously progressive overload can be way more than that, but within bodybuilding they're the main two most people think about. What about adding sets? And it's like, oh, I never thought about adding sets. So I would try and work my training volume through minimum effective volume, maximum adaptive volume, and then MRV, and then deload and rinse and repeat. And I think that's a fine paradigm to work through. But I think there's just so many layers to that that can make it quite complicated. And I do think when you have many moving parts, it can be quite hard to assess what's really going on. So I used to have quite, say, stark differences with starting volumes and ending volumes. And I'd really like push, we're just talking about deloads, and I'd really like almost force a deload upon myself. Like, oh, week 5, week 6 a deload. So man, I better really push hard this week, so I need that deload. Whereas now, I tend to be a lot more conservative with my set volume adjustments and kind of try and find this MAV, if you will, and kind of coast there for as long as I can until I need to kind of hit a wall and need to back off. So my understanding of volume has, I think, that relationship where we have that inverted U, which many people think about, where initially you get much more gains and then it kind of peters off, and then you probably hit like this kind of top end point and then you start seeing diminishing returns. I think that may hold, or it may just be where you kind of climb in terms of set volume, you see more results, and then you kind of just kind of plateau and like you can add more volume, but the returns are incredibly diminishing to not adding anything, but not maybe being a detriment, or maybe they cause more fatigue, so you have to back off sooner. So I kind of try and climb up, get to this point of just, okay, we're doing a good amount of volume, we're seeing very good growth, we're progressing really well. Let's hold here versus forcing a deload or doing more for really heavily diminishing returns. And for people who want to maximize growth, I think that's a great place to be. So I do think that relationship still holds, but the question of set volume is so multifaceted because I tend to look at a training week more as like a stimulus that we're producing versus a volume. Because as you know, Nikias, like a set on leg extensions is not equivocal to one set on hack squats, for example. They're quite different in terms of the overall stimulus that you get to the entire quad. But if you just look at set volume, it's like, hey, one set, one set. It's like, hey, actually, okay, there's lots of things that go into stimulus and that can differ person to person. So I tend to view all the variables at play that lead to what I would term like a maximal adaptive stimulus that I'm trying to get to within someone's training for hypertrophy, and then kind of coast around there for as long as we can. And that takes into consideration exercise selection, proximity to failure, volume, all of those kind of factors as well. So I don't know if that explained how my views on training volume have evolved, but yeah, it's taken me back to not really ever thinking about it, thinking about like not thinking about set volume and how I think hard sets became a thing and set volume really became a thing. But yeah, I'm not going to soon be programming 52 sets. That's for sure. I think some of the research, people look at it and they're like, oh man, that just doesn't make any sense, and they just kind of throw it away. But it's kind of a proof of principle in many ways, where it's like, hey, we're showing this relationship here, which I think is where the value is.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm wondering, I have a couple of follow-up questions on what you said. And one of them is, can you explain a little bit more when you were talking about your previous paradigm that you applied to your training, where you were increasing your sets more frequently week to week? At least that's what I understood that you were saying. And you said that there were a lot of these approach added several layers of complexity and it was harder to understand what was going on. Can you clarify that and talk about that a little bit more for the listeners?
Yeah, so my main issue became because with this paradigm, you would typically start, and I still like doing this, out of a deload week. When you're fresh, you're resensitized, I'm not sure, but certainly it's easier to feel like you're getting a training response. I think the SFR, so the stimulus to fatigue trade-off, doesn't require you to come out the gates hot. I think you can come out a bit cool, and that
Yes.
can set you up for the rest of the mesocycle. So you're building kind of this runway, as it were, versus like coming out balls to the wall, like your pre-deload. You'll just end up wrecked that week because the body is just not in a place to be able to take that on. Because
Mm-hmm.
as we go through the weeks, we adapt, we acclimatize, we can deal with it better. So it's better to push harder later versus sooner in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So the paradigm used to be trying to meet a minimum effective volume, which within the literature, as it's grown, it seems to be the quoted number is 10 sets is like a good starting place. I think it's probably quite a bit less than that for many muscle groups and some people, but I think 10 sets is a fine place to think about in terms of starting out.
Hmm.
And that would be accompanied with leaving up to like 4 reps in reserve. The trouble with that is the um, addition of sets would be based off, can you recover from it? And if you're starting out really easy on both intensity and volume, you can always add sets. And so you would want to add many sets, and I would. The issue with that is when you get such an amount of added quantity, it's hard to ensure your quality is there. And so what I did find, and I have found in practice with myself and clients, is they get to very high numbers of sets, but the training quality in terms of relative intensity was not there, because they'd be like, wow, I have so much to do. They couldn't help but kind of sandbag it. I kind of think it like if you had 100 tasks to do in a day, but really you can only do 50 to a high standard. Those 100 aren't going to be done to a high standard. You're going to kind of cut corners, you're going to hold back, whatever it is. So what I found was that was kind of the trouble people would get into. It. I kind of call it a volume trap, where they're having to make up for the lack of quality or relative intensity with more and more work. And I just don't think that's the best place to be. So that's kind of one of the issues I found with trying to manipulate sets too much. I also just fundamentally don't understand why I would need to, in a week 1 of a program to like a week 4 or 5, double the number of sets of an exercise I'd need to be doing to generate a really good stimulus. I'm like, the body doesn't adapt this quickly. In my head, and from what I know and what I've seen, it doesn't make sense that it would. I think slowly eking up via just a bit of an extra rep or a small amount of load, maybe a set or 2 across an extended period of time, is a better way to go about it. So I'm just less pushy with those variables, and I kind of let the body kind of indicate whether or not it needs it. And I'm the amount of extra stimulus from an added set is actually just so much more than adding just a rep or a small amount of load. So when you do 2 at once, it's a really hefty addition, and I'm just not sure that's always a smart move.
Excellent. Thanks for the exhaustive clarification. And then the other question I had was, now that you take an approach where you're thinking of volume more in terms of what's the total stimulus that we're looking at across the week, then how do you gauge what's effective stimulus and how much is enough?
It's a great question. So I think when I take a look at this from like a new client coming to me, I would always look at their background and history of like how much have they been doing, and what have they found to be productive in the past. I actually just had a consultation with someone. It's not sets, but he was like, anything above 12 reps just doesn't feel productive to me. I just feel like I'm burning out. Psychologically, it's very fatiguing. It just doesn't feel great to me. I'm like, oh, okay. Like in theory, you could go up to 30 reps, and as long as you're close to failure, you can grow really well. But if your body is telling you like it's not working well, then we should listen to that. So I'll definitely take that into consideration. And I was like, hey, we might try some 12 plus rep sets, especially for like delts arms, where I think it maybe has a good use case. But if we try it and you still think that it doesn't feel wholly productive, then I have no problem with using the tools appropriate in your use case. So similar here, if someone was telling me, hey, I need 20 sets for my quads to grow per week, I'd be like, oh, I'm very skeptical of that. I think I'd like to start a bit lower, but I don't want to start like at 5 sets if they think 20 sets has been what's working for them, because they got to 20 for some reason. But I always like to start on the more conservative side, because then we can assess what's truly going on before we add lots of work. So I'd use their background in combination with the literature, which, like I said, I think for lower body lifts, it's closer to maybe like a 6 to 8 is very effective for most people for starting out. Whereas maybe upper body, it's closer to 10, maybe up to 15 for like the back. For a more advanced person, they tend to need a good chunk of volume there. And then what we'll do is kind of let the course run. I'd obviously assess how's their technique. Are we picking good exercises? We would train nice and close to failure. So within 3 reps to failure, I'd check over form videos. Again, execution is good. Relative intensity seems great. They may be seeing a slow concentric rep where they're really having struggled to kind of perform it. So we know like many ducks in a row that this should be stimulative based off their background, based off the literature. And what we know, this should be a solid amount of stimulus. In addition to that, I would be getting them to give me some biofeedback. And this is something that I think is contentious within the evidence-based space, to whether or not you should use biofeedback, how useful it can be. And I think it is useful. I found great success with myself, and I'm also like, what other choice do we have in this moment? I'm not sure. So some of the biofeedback I get is essentially it's a rating of stimulus. Once you've completed that exercise for all the sets, rating from minimal, low, medium, high, how's your stimulus? And that is, high is like, hey, I've got the best pump, disruption, local fatigue that I've ever got in this muscle. It's like I'm struggling to walk with my quads, for example. Low would be, not too much happened, bit of a pump. Yeah, I'm a little bit tired. Minimal would be like, hey, I don't feel like I really trained this. And medium, which is probably like the sweet spot to be in, where it's like, hey, I've got maybe a decent pump, or yeah, it feels pretty tired. I feel like I gave that muscle a good go. That's kind of a medium stimulus. And so I'd be using that to give us an indication of what's the stimulus that we're generating. And that would be cumulative through the session too. So if you had like, I don't know, a chest press and then a chest fly, you might be at low after the chest press, but medium by the time you've done all of your chest fly. But if you were still at low, and then I'd also get them to rate how they're recovering, and they were saying, hey, I'm recovered, then I'd be like, well, based off the literature, more if you recover seems to promote more growth, and you're indicating you don't really feel like that muscle got much of a training effect. We probably should do more. You're recovering, and I've got no reason not to. So, assuming you are training hard and good technique, all that good stuff, you're in a surplus. Maybe that's a pretty good thing to throw in there too, because that can influence these feedback markers too. So then maybe we'd add a set in that case.
Mm.
And so using those alongside some objective performance markers, I get to really build a good picture. So like week on week, is performance going up? Is it plateauing? How is performance moving over time? And then over the course of months and extended periods of time, we can see, okay, the most important thing is that performance is going up. You're hitting PRs irregularly, but regularly, if that makes sense. Like you're not hitting them every week, but every mesocycle, maybe there's an additional rep, a small amount of load. And I get someone to kind of learn their body and how they get feedback, because what I have found those biofeedback numbers to do, in addition to allowing me to kind of get to a point of like solid stimulus in terms of sets, is also exercise selection. If I've got someone who's done 4 sets of an exercise and they're still saying they're low minimal pump, disruption, stimulus rating, I'm like, man, after 4 sets, like 2 to 0 RAR, I think you should really be feeling something good here. And if your technique is good, maybe that exercise is just not one for you. And so maybe there's something we want to adjust there. So yeah, I use that biofeedback to kind of give me an understanding of what's the stimulus, because if I didn't use that, I'd get into situations where I would inappropriately add volume. I had it the other day. It's a torturous leg session. I don't know why I'm doing it, but it seems to be providing a good stimulus. I have 2 sets of hack squats, Nikas, and they're 15 to 20 reps. And after those 2 sets, I'm like, man, I've got a medium, pretty damn good pump. I go into leg extensions and superset with lunges. After 1 set of those, I'm like, I can barely walk around the gym right now. I'm struggling to hold myself up. The kind of pump in my quads is uncomfortable. If I looked at that on paper, I'd be like, man, that's maybe 3-4 sets of quads. Yeah, you should probably do some more, especially if you really want your quads to grow. Like that's quite low. If you're only training quads twice a week, that's very on the low volume side. But using those feedback tools, I'm like, hey, if I added more here, I'd probably just be fatiguing myself more than I necessarily should. And I don't think that would be wholly productive. My performance wouldn't be great because of the amount of pump that I've got in my quads. Like I just wouldn't be able to perform in various lifts, which could just lead to quote unquote junk volume, or at least diminishing returns at that point. I'd be better off recovering and putting it towards something else. So yeah, that's the way I like to look at it.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for explaining. Super clear. Now, from set volume, the next topic that I want to touch on is the intensity of effort, and how you originally thought of it, if you thought of it at all, and how your thinking about it has evolved through the ages as you gained more wisdom.
Yeah, so this is probably a good midwit meme, kind of. Like you said, it's not quite there. So when I first started, it wasn't anything I thought about. I'm pretty sure I didn't like try to fail, but I'd always try and add more load and more reps, like every
Mm-hmm.
session. It was just like, I think it's just obvious for some reason when you first go to the gym to like always be trying to push the limits. And obviously there's ego involved. I was a 15-year-old like male at this time. Like you just have the testosterone and your mates are around you and you're like egging each other on. And if they're lifting heavier than you want to try and lift what they're lifting. You see the big guy in the gym, you're like, reckon I can lift that weight. So you'd inevitably just be pushing yourself to your limits. And I don't think that's the best way, especially as a newbie, to learn like good technique and things like this. But that's where I was when I started. Then I can't remember who I learned RPE from, but it was RPE that I first came across. RAR was a later kind of extension to RPE. So rate of perceived exertion, which was a scale of 1 to 10, essentially of like how challenging are you like pushing yourself. I think I really learned that from a powerlifting perspective, because that's where it first kind of, I think at least within the space we're in, that's where it was more purposely used through RPS, through Mike Teixeira. He kind of formalized the RPE system within training. And so then I started using like 7 to 10 RPEs within training and kind of thought I had a pretty good understanding of that. And I was actually coached at the time for my first contest prep. That's probably the first time I had it like structured into programming that I can remember. I don't remember 5-3-1 ever having that in the program. I followed 5-3-1, but I think it mostly just had a percentage and reps that you needed to achieve, and then it had like an AMRAP. So you would be leaving reps in the tank, and then you'd kind of just go balls to the wall. But I don't know how well I actually stuck to that. So yeah, my first exposure was probably RPE through having a coach and using it there, more so for my powerlifting. And then it just developed that RAR, so reps in reserve, became a more appropriate tool. And I think I learned that really off Mike Israetel and Renaissance periodization. I think there's also like reps from failure for a while people were talking about, but I think RAR is just an easier concept. It's a little bit more objective. A 9 RPE isn't quite the same as 1 RAR, because RPE is like rate of perceived exertion. How hard do you feel it is? Do you feel like you've got another rep? Whereas 1 RAR is like, you've got 1 rep. There's no two ways about it. So then I started using that. And like I said, this was at a time where it was believed like a 4, maybe even more than 4 reps in reserve could be equivocal for hypertrophy as 0 as failure. There's kind of this, the scientific literature wasn't completely clear on this subject. I know Mike Zerdos for a while was kind of looking down that line and thinking, hey, maybe you can really train with lots of reps in reserve and see just as good growth. And that could potentially provide a better SFR, because we all know anecdotally training to failure is far more fatiguing than leaving some reps in the tank. But I think also anecdotally, when you think about it that way, when you train closer to failure, that stimulus side that I talked about, that biofeedback, you also notice that. You notice you get better pumps, better disruption when you train closer to failure. And for some reason, I kind of tried to, I don't know, I ignored that part of it and I tried to just follow what the experts were saying. And so I would, for a long time, I was leaving lots of reps in reserve, to the point I don't think I really ever trained to failure, but probably a good few years, where I was always like conservative, leave 1 rep in reserve. So much so, I see some of my Facebook like history or whatever memories that come up. And I look back and I see some videos that I shared. I'm like, it makes me embarrassed to think back to it. It's like my 6th set of dumbbell press, 1 RAR. I'm like, 6 sets? What the hell are you doing 6 sets for? 1 RAR. I watched the set and I'm like, Steve, Jesus, you had like 3 reps in reserve on that tank. No wonder you did 6 sets to feel like you did anything. So yeah, it's kind of embarrassing that happened. Like I said, I got into that kind of volume trap where my quality wasn't high. So then as time has kind of gone on, I would question myself, because something just felt a bit wrong. I'd always be like, am I quite training hard enough? You know, the UK scene too is very much like Dorian Yates, go hard or go home. So I was always feeling a bit pulled towards that a little bit. And people within the UK could be a bit critical of some of the way that I had advised training and maybe some of my training. So I began to test myself a bit more, train to failure more often. And I think I actually got a very good understanding of reps in reserve. And then over the last couple of years, the meta regression from Zach Robinson came out, where they looked at a broad range of literature at this relationship of relative intensity and also hypertrophy. And they found, hey, actually, the closer you get to failure, you see exponential growth, like quite different to what we necessarily thought. We thought probably as you got closer to failure, there's a bit more growth, but not quite as strong a relationship as this. And that meta regression is not perfect, because there's many limitations to it. lots of the frequencies used and the frequencies used, I think, and volumes were quite low. Like the training population, again, like lots of caveats and things, but I still think that relationship probably holds. And then having spoken to Martin Refalo quite a bit, where his PhD is essentially looking at this relationship of reps in reserve and hypertrophy, I began to kind of get a bit of a better understanding of, okay, maybe we want to individualize this as well, possibly person to person, muscle group to muscle group, exercise to exercise. So rather than kind of having this blanket, hey, start mesocycle at 3 RER and progress to 1, it'll be a case of, oh, maybe an exercise that has a high volume tolerance, train it a bit closer to failure so you don't have to pull so high on the volume. And then maybe exercises where the fatigue isn't that high, like carbs, train those a bit closer to failure on average, so that, again, you're not getting the cost of the fatigue side, but your big compound leg movements, maybe it's still good to train a bit further from failure on those. Maybe still leave a rep in reserve on like a RDL or something like that, because the kind of cost to benefit ratio is just not there for those movements. And so I kind of moved from, again, training probably on average too close to failure, then too far from it probably. And then I have now moved the ballpark again to probably in the middle ground of an average of a 2 to 1 RER within my training mesocycles. So a bit close to failure given the relationship. And that's modified based off the person to some extent, their preferences, and then also volume tolerance and to some extent rep range as well, and exercise selection. So we know the higher the rep range, the less good we are at kind of being able to assess whether or not we're close to as close to failure. And also the higher in reps, probably we need to be a bit closer to see the equivalent hypertrophy, whereas maybe 10 reps or less seems to be actually going to failure is no more growth. It's because you're training heavy enough at this point. So those big compound lifts, especially legs, leaving a bit more in the tank. And that just got to a bit more of an individualized and better stimulus fatigue trade-off overall, and moved me away from this volume trap, as it were, because I would start out mesocycles truly, really respecting what hard training is. And rather than thinking I was at 3 RER, actually being at 3 RER, and then training very hard for an extended period of time. So that's kind of how that's evolved.
It's interesting how our way of thinking on this topic has evolved in pretty much the same way, because we follow the same literature and we also speak to the same people in the industry. And then I found it, though, fascinating when you were talking about how at first you were using RPE and then you switched to RIR, because I see the RPE scale and the RIR scale as the same thing, just in reverse, in that the original, just for the listeners, I know you know, but the original RPE scale was actually a rating of perceived exertion scale primarily for cardio, whereby you would rate how hard a cardio session was. So it wasn't appropriate resistance training at all. And then Mike Tushirer, as you were saying, from RTS, made it practical for powerlifting, to where he said every point on the scale corresponds to a repetition. So when you get to 10, that's the last repetition you can do with good form. And if you do another one, you fail. And then I came into the industry when Eric Helms had published his pyramids of his books, the strength and nutrition pyramids. I can't remember the title, but everybody
Muscle
knows
and strength
it.
pyramids. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one, the muscle and strength pyramids, and the nutrition book as well. And he brought that understanding of RPE into his book, or at least when I was reading it, that's how I interpreted RPE. So to me, I always think of the RPE scale as the RIR based RPE scale, because it is based on reps in reserve. So to me, it's exactly the same. And because when I started, I read those books, and Eric at the time was talking specifically about RPE, I've always stuck with RPE because that's just what I understand. And I also, whenever I talk to somebody like you, I get confused because they'll say low RIR, and I'll be like low, and then I'll be like, oh right, high RPE, and then we understand each other.
Yeah, I have that with clients regularly, and I know what they mean when they say it, because sometimes they get it confused, because like you, a lot of people come from RPE background and never switched. Whereas I made the switch and then I was like, I'm a hard cut off, no RPE for me. That reminds me of powerlifting and I don't want to be reminded of it.
Fair enough. I think it's a matter of semantics in the end. And for some people,
Of course.
just as you said, it is if I think about it rationally, RIR makes a lot. It is more intuitive because it's like one RIR, one rep in reserve, whereas RPE 9 is the same thing, but you have to think about it in reverse. But now it's so automatic for me to think about it in reverse that I never made the switch because I didn't find it necessary for myself.
Yeah, I think there's some tables out there actually where they've basically been like, this is what the equivalent of RAR is to RPE. It's literally just like you said, flipped over. It's like, it's not that complex.
Yeah,
But
I
it
thought
confuses people.
this was a bit said a bit tongue in cheek, but I thought it was helpful because otherwise I think some listeners might get confused, thinking, "Oh, so RPE isn't good now." No, it's the same thing, just just flipped, basically.
Yeah, I think there's some, like you said, there's a bit of semantics behind some of the powerlifters, like because it's perceived exertion. There are some like nuances
Hmm.
within that that it's maybe not as objective and can't quite be applied the same. But if you use the RPE scale for hypertrophy, it's
Yeah,
exactly as you said. You just use it like that.
exactly. So with that, I think we've covered the intensity of effort topic in quite a lot of depth. So my next question for you would be, how has your understanding of technique changed over the years?
Cool. So yeah, technique. This is another midwit meme. So when I started, to some extent, it's exactly as the intensity one. So technique for me when I first started, I don't know where I learned it because I did learn it, and I think I was mostly like copying other people in the gym, and you have a basic understanding of the dumbbell should come down, it should go up on a dumbbell press. So like that wasn't any kind of good education in that regard. I don't remember having any teachers for that, but I think I probably learned quite a bit of technique from like YouTube fitness when it first came up. So that was like Matt Ogus's time, this like 2010s, something around there. Ian McCarthy actually would put out quite a bit. He might have been too early for you, Nick, yes, but some of the listeners might know of him, and he would put quite a bit of like specific hypertrophy style lifts. And I was like, oh, that's quite cool. This is a bit different. But I think I didn't really get into technique properly until powerlifting, and that was very much A to B and moving things around. But it definitely wasn't as there wasn't as many resources out there as there are now. You can flick through Instagram and you'll just find someone doing a technique video like left, right, and center. Whereas when I was first getting into it, it's like I don't know textbooks. So I was just learning from those. Actually, probably learned from Mark Ripto starting strength. He had quite a bit of technique stuff in there. Again, powerlifting, strength background. It was very
Hmm.
much like moving A to B versus anything else. So I definitely didn't have a good foundation of learning technique. Then my again, this person is going to come up a lot probably. My real fundamental kind of education on technique was through Mike Israetel, because I think he made a huge inlay into the fitness industry and evidence-based industry, like truly talking about like full range of motion, controlling your lifts, like making sure the muscle is doing the work. Because at 3MJ, they had good content, but they were very powerlifting focused as well. So I think a lot of their content was driven towards that kind of A to B, like squat, bench, deadlift type of stuff. And a lot of the people I followed were bodybuilders, but also power builders. And so Matt Ogus, for example, he didn't really do like technique style videos and things. So I definitely started learning most of my technique off Mike Israel. It was like very different to the way I would lift, like very controlled, slow eccentrics, like accentuating the stretch and things like this. And that was great. And that combined with leaving some reps in reserve really got me to looking like I had pristine technique. But I think sometimes it also led to me to having this strict rule of technical failure. So rather than thinking about it like I think about it a bit more now, is trying to take a muscle to momentary muscular failure. I would think about exercises and taking them to technical failure. And I had a very strict technique policy. And so what that meant was if I had slight deviations that I would look at now and be like, dude, you've got so much left, keep going. It needs your technique needs to deviate a little bit when you're training hard, close to failure, because that's what things do. As things are struggling to keep performing, you see things break down a little bit. Whereas I would call it there, I'd be like, technical failure. My knee tracked in half a centimeter inwards on the right side. I felt it. It's like, dude, come on. Like you just focus on that next rep, it won't come in. So yeah, I had quite a strict definition of technique. Over time, as I again started pushing myself a bit more and just tried to kind of identify some of those biofeedback proxies in terms of stimulus, I found, hey, like I can't keep cutting lifts just as it starts like getting to that point. I need to push a bit harder to try and take this muscle to momentary muscular failure. So over the last 2 years or so, 2 to 3 years probably, my technique probably looks rougher than it's looked for a long time. Like to the point where sometimes, Nick, yes, I question if I should put up a form video because I'm like, man, are some people going to like pick at me because my technique doesn't look as pristine? But I know now I've got to this level of advancement that like a little bit of heave ho in some instances, a little bit of what looks like technical breakdown is just allowing you to take that muscle further to failure. And those kind of reps are very growth promoting, and so I think worth taking there. So yeah, my technique's got a bit looser, not to the same like it was at the start, and not for the same reasons. I'm not moving something A to B and just about load. It is now much more about trying to take that muscle to momentary muscular failure and doing a technique that allows me to get there. And if that means it has to look a little bit less pristine, I think it actually needs to go that way to get to that end result. And so my view on technique has changed. This has been kind of confirmed, I guess, actually, through the paper that was recently published with Dr. Pack. And I had him on my podcast, and I know Jeff Nippard was on this paper too. But they looked at the literature on technique, for which there really isn't very much. There's nothing super concrete either. But what it helped do was some of these kind of laws almost of what good technique is that were ingrained upon the evidence-based space of like almost the slower the eccentric, the better. The more pause, the better. The longer of a muscle length, the better. The fuller of a contraction and peak squeeze, the better. It kind of put those into questions. Like, actually, we don't have good literature to support that. Rep cadence can be quite a bit more of a wide range than that. And this helped confirm many of the things I experienced, where if I remember look at my hack squats and be like, man, I'm too fast on that eccentric. So I started doing like 3 to 4 second eccentrics. I started progressing those. I'm like, man, this just feels like I don't feel like I can take that muscle to the same point of muscular failure if I strictly hold myself to these slow eccentrics. So I just started letting lifts kind of gravitate to what the element of control felt right to me to get that stimulus for that muscle. And I think that's the right way to go about it. There's kind of quite large swaths of ranges for hypertrophy. It's very permissive, and you kind of have to navigate it and find your route. So I think my evolution of what I think is good technique for hypertrophy kind of got it improved to the point of like, yeah, we're trying to not just train A to B, we're trying to train a muscle. But then it was too kind of quote unquote picture perfect technique within like a textbook. And then I allowed it, actually, let's try and not just think about A to B, but think about taking a muscle close or to momentary muscular failure. And at that point, when you're getting close to failure, it's not going to look pristine. As long as it's safe, effective within the realms of all of that, we're in a good spot.
If you have a bit of a less experienced client than you are, how do you help them navigate the difference between letting your technique change to accommodate getting closer to the point of task failure while still having the muscle being the limiting factor, and actually using momentum for the sake of doing more reps or lifting heavier weights, to where the muscle is not really the limiting factor and anymore, and you're just lifting for the sake of it? If somebody has less experience than you with their own biofeedback, how do you help them navigate that difference?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite simple. I think the place I'm at with my technique isn't where someone should start. They need to start, and I almost probably needed to go through what I went through to be able to get to where I am now, where we know when you're less advanced that you can grow from much less volume, much less relative intensity. And so it's a great time. And this is why I said when I started, I wish I didn't train to failure and like push to that point because my technique wasn't great. I just didn't have the control. So I think getting someone to focus a little bit more on kind of pristine looking textbook technique is a great place to start. And then on lifts where it's safe to, where it's quite easy to lock in and get like a great technique kind of no matter what you're doing, like a leg extension, there's only so much you can fuck that up. Like you can take people to failure on that lift. Obviously, you can definitely screw around and lift your hips loads and I don't know, somehow help it go. But that becomes very obvious. The person knows they're doing it. Or like on a bicep curl, you can kind of, if you're locked into a preacher curl, you can take someone to like a failure point. But I think having that like slower, more controlled focus initially is a good place to be. But once you are good at that, don't just stay there. You got to push kind of a little bit further forward, and you'll soon learn. Sometimes I had dysnikias for the longest time until I started using lengthened partials on back work. I'd do dumbbell bent over rows, and I'd start using a bit of momentum towards the end to even out the strength to resistance profile to allow me to continue to get some effective reps. But I'd get to like a rep and I'd do it, and I'd be like, I just know I swung that up and didn't really use the muscle. And luckily, I work with mostly quite advanced clients, and I had that conversation with a lot of them where they're like, "Yeah, I took it to that rep where I'm like, didn't really get what I needed out of that, so it was kind of like failure for them."
That makes sense. I agree with you actually when you say that you're okay with the fact that you went through that phase that you did with your own technique journey, because I also went through a similar phase where when I started, I liked to lift according to my ego versus according to my muscles. So I often found that I I I would cut the range of motion here and there just to be able to keep going and lift more weight. Then I went through a phase where I thought I need to tighten this up because I came across Mike Israel like you, and so I became way too strict about my own form to where, as you were saying, if my pinky finger was slipping, I needed to stop the set essentially. And but then because I went through the ego lifting, now I know what it feels like when the muscle is no longer the limiting factor. And similarly, because I was extremely strict with my technique, now I can tell the difference between me being perfectionistic and me actually just having good form and then letting it go a little bit when I feel that I can get a little bit more out of it if I do that.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think something you mentioned there that I maybe should have mentioned was having some standardization is great.
Hmm.
So I think the Mike Israel standardization I set myself was something like on a pull down, if I can't touch my clavicle, you failed.
Hmm.
Whereas now, and that could lead you down the wrong route. Like any momentum, you failed. Any kind of picture perfect, or you failed essentially. Whereas
Hmm.
I think now I think of ranges. So it's like, hey, a bit of momentum within a reasonable range is acceptable. Like a bit of range of motion drop off within a range is acceptable. So you kind of give yourself these ranges where, yeah, as soon as you get that rep that's outside of the range, that's like complete failure at this point.
Yeah, the way I see it for my own training now is my standardization comes from the stimulus that I feel. As long as I feel the same stimulus, then form is fine. Because at this point, I know what a squat looks like. I've done it so many times. So it's not like I'm gonna suddenly start doing a good morning instead. So I already know that I have some standardization coming from my experience and practice. So then within that, when you're saying, basically we're saying the same thing, you're saying you move within a range. And what I'm saying is that the my range is based upon the stimulus. So I let my form change as long as I keep feeling the same stimulus. When the stimulus drops off, then as you were saying, I realize, okay, I'm just swinging this weight with momentum and it's no longer as stimulative.
Yeah, yeah, it makes complete sense that the row example fits in with just what you said there.
Exactly. To where, as you were saying, when I was doing a lat pull down, I would say, well, the moment I'm an inch above my chest and it's no longer touching my chest exactly, well, that's bad form, so I need to stop. Whereas now, as we were as we will talk about with regards to range of motion, knowing what we know about the importance of the lengthened position and lengthened range versus the shortened range, at the bottom of a pull down, you're in the shortened range. So if I lose a little bit of range there, but I can keep going and keep the full stretch at the top, then I'm not as bothered anymore. And with my clients, however, when they are less experienced than me, I do take them through a little bit more of extra form standardization at first, where we are more strict with form because they don't have the experience to tell me, oh, I am swinging the weight versus no, I'm swinging it for a reason because I get a better stimulus. But when they start giving me biofeedback that makes me understand they actually know when they're stimulating the muscle and when they're not, then I start introducing them to the concept of you can be more flexible with form now because you learned strict form at first. So now you know what it feels like to stimulate that muscle. So if your form changes a little bit, especially towards the end when you're reaching failure, that's fine as long as you maintain that stimulus.
I completely agree. I'm more and more hands off the longer I've been working with a client and the more
Hmm.
advanced they are, because they have the skill set that we've developed together and they have the understanding and they can make better calls than I can. I think about it very much like, I don't know, if you've got to get to an A to B via a destination, like you've got a journey. If you've never been there before, you better follow the directions in the map. Or even better, as a chef, like everyone knows this, like follow the recipe to the book if you've never made it before.
Yes.
But once you've eaten enough pie or whatever you're making, you start knowing what you like and tinkering with it, and you can make it even nicer and better. But you can't jump to that stage immediately, otherwise you're just going to make a complete disaster.
Yeah, that's an excellent analogy. I'm gonna steal it. I love it. And since I mentioned range of motion, that is the next topic of conversation I want to cover, especially now that it's in the last couple of years, it's come to the fore as quite a popular topic. I'd like to know what if you ever thought of range of motion when you started, how you thought of it, and how you think about it now.
Yeah, so similar to technique, didn't really like know much about. I didn't ever think about range of motion. No, I thought about technique a little bit because I would look at textbooks, I would look at other people, but I never really thought does technique play into range of motion? How does it play into exercise selection? Anything like that. I just It was maybe a term that I learned. I don't know when, before I started doing my PT kind of qualification, but it wasn't a big picture thing that I'd really think heavily about. It probably wasn't really until, and then I started thinking about it, but more from an A to B perspective, never from like a insertion, origin and insertion of a muscle perspective. That's been certainly in the later years. I started to think about it probably more with Mike Israetel again, with his technique and trying to get a full range of motion. And so really thinking about sitting deep into movements, getting a big stretch on the chest, for example, on like a fly, and really thinking about that, because I think at the time many people in the evidence-based space knew there was something maybe to stretch mediated hypertrophy. This was something that got thrown around a lot. Obviously now we know that what is leading to growth at long muscle lengths isn't necessarily even stretch mediated hypertrophy. That's quite a nuanced and discussion that I can't really get into, but at least that was like why people were thinking, hey, sitting deep into movements, going deep into them, getting a big stretch. And I remember actually Mike saying something along the lines of like, actually getting that heavy stretch is almost like it's a hypertrophic stimulus in for itself, right?
Hmm.
Getting that kind of big stretch on a muscle. So I certainly actually was training at longer muscle lengths for a long time, but more so thinking about it from a perspective of range of motion of an exercise. Whereas now I think about training at a long muscle length more from a anatomy perspective, because you could train at full ROM for an exercise, but it doesn't train that muscle at a very long length, like a spider
Hmm.
curl with the elbows ahead. Like you're not actually getting to that long of a muscle length, although you're training at the longest length, and it's not even loaded. So like now it's like really evolved the last like 2 to 3 years. My thinking surrounding, hey, the literature is quite clearly showing we want to train a muscle and at its anatomy level at a long muscle length, and we want to load it at that long muscle length. So that's been a really cool evolution, actually. It's probably been the most exciting thing within hypertrophy research and the hypertrophy space. So thank you to Milo Wolf, who has probably furthered the field in that regard the most through his initial meta-analyses, where they did like basically had like a subsection where they started looking at, hey, most of the researchers looked at partial range of motion at short lengths versus full ROM. So yeah, that wins. Full ROM wins. But when we compare full ROM versus long muscle length partials, oh, okay, long muscle length partials seem to win in almost every single case, or neutral, and that data hasn't changed. It's just grown. And I can't speak specifically to the research heavily. It's to some extent debated how effective it is and things like this. I think Milo's done a good job of kind of explaining that, hey, we don't want to cut range of motion. We definitely want to start loading that long muscle length. And so, probably a good 2 or so years ago, I started incorporating some long muscle length partials, where I thought made the most practical sense. And where it made the most practical sense to me was for muscle groups that uh, the exercises were generally hardest where the muscle was weakest. So, for example, basically every back exercise, unless you've got prime or strive equipment where you can bias the resistance profile to be hardest at the stretch or at the start position, virtually every row, every pull is hardest at peak squeeze and easiest when you're like at full stretch. and that's opposite to where that muscle's strongest. So I was like, hey, I'm going to do some full ROM sets because, hey, that's what the literature has generally suggested, do full ROM. But I'm going to incorporate a little bit of partial work here because maybe there's something to it, especially for muscles where, again, that relationship is there where it's kind of strongest, where the exercise is easiest. So I started to incorporate it with back training and then calf training. Calf training also because, hey, fuck calves, anything that'll get them to grow. Let's try experimenting. But also, that's where a lot of the literature has been, is in the calves, and consistently people are seeing pretty damn good calf growth. And there was also some literature surrounding like just stretching the calves for extended periods of time, and we're seeing growth. So that was quite exciting. So I started to incorporate it there. And this is great because it all circles around this biofeedback that's heavily kind of debated to whether or not it's something you should bother using. But my stimulus indicators of pump, disruption, soreness were all improving. And it wasn't just a novelty factor. I was finding I was just getting more and I was progressing really well. Like my calf strength grew heavily during this period of time. I'm convinced they've grown, and I'm certain if I'd measured them, and I wish I had, they'd grown quite a bit. I still look at them and I'm like, man, I maybe look like I've got reasonable calves at this point, but they've definitely come up. And then I definitely am excited to, I'm currently on a diet for comp prep this year. I'm excited to reveal how my back's going to be looking, but already on the shots I needed it to, on my front shots, my lower lats, for example, they're showing a bit more. And so I think it's done something very positive. If anything, it's been neutral. Like my progressions have been pretty, they've been as good, if not better, for these movements. So anyway, I started to layer it in a little bit, so experimenting with it, started giving it to clients a little bit, peppering it in, at the same time keeping up to date with the literature, seeing what direction that was going in. And the literature and my feedback for myself and clients was moving in the same direction. It seems to be a good idea. So I would move to the point of which all my back training is partial range of motion at long muscle lengths, and has been for an extended time. And I'm experimenting with exercises that get me to the longest length for certain muscles, like a iliac pull around from N1 Kassem Hansen, where you're using the rib cage as a way of extra length on the lats there that wrap around the rib cage. So that's been it's been fun because I've been training for a long time, as you mentioned, but two, that biofeedback's been there and it's been confirmed through the literature. And again, my clients, virtually all of them, have enjoyed using partials and seen better biofeedback from that. And I think that's going to lead to, as I work with them for a long time, more growth for them too. So that's been great. I have also tried it for exercises where you already are getting kind of peak forces at long muscle lengths, like pressing or squatting. And some areas I like it, other areas I don't. I think it's going to have a far lesser of effect because it's already such a complementary exercise in terms of resistance to your strength. So I don't think there's going to be such a big role there. But certainly for those exercises and muscles, that it doesn't seem to be complementary in that fact. And also just putting most of my training in the bucket of at longer muscle lengths in general, and not worrying about maybe a spider curl. Like it just doesn't seem to be something that I would bother programming. It's been a wise move, and yeah, the literature keeps moving in that direction. I'm excited to see more of it. So that's kind of how my range of motion and thoughts behind it has evolved over time. I'll tell you what, Nikias, I don't know if you're using many length and partials, but when I first started doing them, I felt dirty. I was like, I'm so used to doing full range of motion. Man, I was like, people looking at me like I'm just pulling this lat pull down to my eyes, like, oh. But now I'm like fully ingrained. I'm like, people might look at me weird, but they're the ones missing out, I think.
Dude, I completely understand that because as we were talking about, we were both obsessed with the lat pull, with touching the bar to the chest on the lat pull down. When I stopped doing that, I was my specific exercise where it really hit me that I was doing something really different in my perception was the barbell bent over row. I had never liked the barbell bent over row. I tried it over the years multiple times for a lot of mesocycles, and I just didn't like it. I didn't feel it in the back very much, and I would often find myself just going up in weight and reps without feeling much of a stimulus. And then I realized that most recently, because of the length and partials conversation, that it was likely because I was so obsessed with getting the bar to touch my abdomen every time. So that eventually would lead to me actually swinging the bar up so that it would touch the my body. And so I would use momentum, but circling back to what we were saying about technique, it wasn't effective momentum. It was just momentum to close the range of motion because I thought that it was necessary. Whereas when I started using length and partials, all of a sudden my back was on fire. And I love the barbell bent over row. And now I do it all the time. It's been in my program for ages. And it's just because now I stop it when it's hard to describe, but you kind of get an idea of where you need to stop your length and
Yeah.
partial range of motion. Like you can feel it that you don't need to pull any further up than that. When I get there and then I lower the bar down and I get into a full stretch, man, my back is so happy. So, but the first time when I started doing that, I was like, dude, I spent so many years fighting to get this bar to touch my belly, and now people are telling me, like experts that I trust are telling me, you don't need to do that anymore. Man, that feels wrong.
Yeah, yeah, I was the same way. And then for some reason, the barbell bent over row, it looks really obvious because it is that lift where a lot of people lift with ego and things like
Yeah.
this. So especially when you've come from the background of not having your ego attached to load, but more so technique, it starts to like be like, like it feels so wrong to be doing this, but it feels so right.
Yes. Exactly. And actually, you already mentioned it, but I was going to ask you if you found any exercises where the lengthened range or lengthened partials don't feel very productive. And you've mentioned exercises where the hardest part of the range of motion already is the lengthened position or lengthened range, like deadlift variations or squat variations. Are there any other exercises where you've tried lengthened partials and you found, this doesn't feel any different or maybe feels even worse?
Yeah. So definitely on deadlifts and squats. I've done it specifically in the Smith machine because
Mhm.
you'd be crazy to do it with a barbell because that's not going to be fun if you fail on that.
Yep.
Whereas the Smith machine, you're a bit safe with that. It's a bit safer. And I did it on leg press, and I just found that it was. And I've done it actually with deadlifts, and it felt okay with. I did it with belt squat deadlifts,
Hmm.
and that felt okay. But the trouble with it was trying to maintain good bracing and posture and the lower back being in a safe and conducive position to lifting. I just found it coming to the top and having that opportunity to where it's easy to brace again and get into a good position made it more effective for me. And the same with squats and with the leg press. I was like, you kind of feel like it. It sounds stupid to say this, but dying, like you're just like constantly. It's like constant. It's constant tension this way. So you're not ever getting any reprieve, and there's no kind of reset of technique and just opportunity to get a breath. And with these big compound leg movements, being able to breathe and everything like that is pretty important. So yeah, I found those not to be wholly productive. I have, however, been doing it on some pressing, and I do find on some pressing movements I quite like it. I'm not completely set. Part of it is because for me, I don't really worry too much about triceps and biceps. They just kind of grow on their own. So if I can remove the short position, it's a little bit of tricep that I'm kind of getting rid of, can keep it a bit more on the pecs. So I am currently doing partials in pressing, but I don't know how much I like it. And I kind of, I like. There is something I like about locking out the triceps, having a bit of a reset, coming back down, bracing
Mm.
to be able to do that. So yeah, I'm kind of here or there with those. Then again, with the dumbbells and with the Smith machine, I quite liked it, but I don't know if that will hold fully. But for the most part, yeah, I and especially leg training, I pretty much keep for the big compound lifts. I just keep it as full range of motion because I think that is my preference and what I felt most confident in progressing long term.
Yeah, I found the same thing. Whereas where we differ is that I don't use length and partial range of motion in that I get almost to lockout on presses, but I found that on dumbbell presses, And also on barbell presses, I do that on the Smith machine as well. It's not length and partial because it's not just half range of motion, but right before I would lock out, I stop, and I found that that actually helps me keep more stimulus on the pecs for me. But I've always struggled to feel my pecs, so I've experimented with a lot of things, and I finally landed on this and other aspects of technique that really help me feel it a lot more throughout the set. So that's where we differ a little bit.
Yeah, I like those soft lockouts. You get that kind of combination effect of it's a little bit of reprieve, but it also keeps you in the set and keeps the tension on
Mhm.
that muscle where you can keep maybe that mind muscle connection. You can make sure you don't take a breather or something like that. So I know what you mean with that. And this is where that like advanced training technique, like individual to you, can come through.
Yeah, exactly. The way it feels is I can feel my pecs squeezing to get to the top, but I don't lock out. So then I don't feel my triceps really, which can can distract me from my pecs. And then I have the control all the way down into the full stretch, and I go again. And I find that that's really effective for myself personally.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. The other place I think it's really helped me with this literature coming out is individual getting my side delt training in a good place,
Hmm.
because for the longest time I just do like dumbbell lateral raises, maybe some cable lateral raises, but now like really trying to get that side delt at a long length, so coming across the body or behind the body, and then
Hmm.
getting the cable up at hand height so that you're getting peak forces at that long muscle length, and then just raising to shoulder height versus coming up here, which just feels complete pointless when you're doing it that way to me. I think that's helped a ton for my side delts to come up, which has been really cool. So yeah, if people haven't tried just making sure they're loading long muscle lengths, I definitely think they're missing out.
Yeah, I agree with you on the point about lateral raises. My new clients must think that I'm some weirdo who's obsessed with the lateral cable raise because everybody gets lateral cable raises. I probably, I don't, I. It's not that I never program dumbbell lateral raises because everybody has dumbbells at the end of the day, but I certainly program them way less often. If somebody has access to a functional trainer, it's cable lateral raises and cable lateral raises and cable lateral raises with different pulley heights to bias different parts of the range of motion. But I found the literature on lengthened range of motion really helpful to focus on getting more out of delt training.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's I never had a delt pump before doing it this way. And again, that biofeedback coming through, I'm showing my bias here, but I can't ignore my anecdotal correlation with what seems to have really led to potent muscle growth.
Yes, we were saying before recording that I was just deloading last week. My first session included two sets of lateral raises. They were on the cable with the cable machine. The pulley was set so that the lengthened range of motion was the most biased. I got a pump, and the next day I was sore. I used to have to do like a gazillion sets of lateral raises to feel anything, and now after two sets, I was like, man, this was a lot for today.
This is why it's so important not to focus just on set volume, but to
Hmm.
focus more on stimulus. Prime example where you had to do so much more work to get less stimulus and you just did two sets. It's like, hey, if I was focusing on sets, you're like, Nikias, you're growing less now. And you're like, hey, shut up. There's no way I'm growing less.
Yeah, exactly. No, for me, it was a real paradigm shift in my understanding of training and effective training in particular. When I used to be obsessed with doing as much volume as possible. Basically, when I read the science and it said 10 to 20 sets is a good range to build muscle, my brain went, 20 is a good number to build muscle. So I remember doing a full leg day where I had 9 sets for quads and 9 sets for hamstrings. And somehow I survived that. And when I say somehow, clearly I wasn't taking these sets very close to failure. Most likely my form wasn't the best because now, if I do 6 sets for hamstrings in one session, I find that personally I really like having one session with a lot of volume for either hamstrings or quads, and then just maybe 2 or 3 sets in another session for the same muscle. And if I do 4 to 6 sets for hamstrings on the higher volume day, they're fried. And that's because I now focus a lot more on getting the most that I can out of as little work as I can, which I think is also practical for clients, because while I may decide that I can spend 2 hours in the gym, most of my clients can train 3 to 5 times per week for an hour. So they're not going to be there doing 20 sets to make up for lower quality. So I really push the higher quality, because that's how they're going to get better results from doing less volume.
Yeah, yeah, makes so much sense. I have looked back at some of my training logs when I was in that like my peak volume era, and yeah, I know my back at some point I think got above 60 sets per week. It's kind of really ridiculous. And I think now, how the hell did I do that? And it's exactly as you said. Quality was not there, the intensity was not there, and that's what led me down that path.
Yeah, the way I survived those 18 sets of hamstrings and 18 sets of quads every week is that I ego lifted a lot. So I basically only started growing my quads in the last 2 years, probably, because up until then it was a lot of glute work, because my glutes are very strong. So every time I squatted, my glutes were like, yeah, let's do this. And I was like, why am I not getting a pump in the quads? I'm doing 18 sets per week. Now, if I do more than 13 sets, my quads are like, what are you doing? Stop. You can't walk now if you do 14. And I'm like, okay, I'll stop there. And it's all because of this increased focus on the stimulus.
Yes, another great example of that biofeedback again, where you got the pump and disruption in the glutes, and they were the thing responding and growing. But also a great example of the evolution of like personal technique. There could be some people that squat and their quads just grow amazingly. But sounds like from you and me, like if we just do a barbell back squat, it's going to be a lot of glutes unless we really bias it towards quads. Which now we have the skills and knowledge of insertion to origin. I'm trying to stretch that muscle as much as possible. This is how it should probably look. So yeah, I that's why I love bodybuilding. It's forever a learning event.
Yeah, I agree. And I find it fascinating to be able to combine the emerging scientific literature with your own personal experience to tease out the right approach for you as an individual.
For sure. Yeah, that's evidence-based practice at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, that's true. On that note, I essentially realized after the first 20 minutes that we spent talking about volume, I thought we're not covering nutrition today. So, what I'm going to do, Steve, is I'm going to have you back on so that we can discuss nutrition. But I think we've covered a lot of different training variables and provided a lot of value to the audience. So, I really just want to thank you again for coming on today.
Amazing. Yeah, sorry, I'm surprised. I'm normally pretty concise. I was saying this to my partner just recently, where I was like, I think social media has caused my brain to just talk in like short sentences because you only have like 30 seconds or something for a story. But clearly, I can still talk plenty when it's a topic I'm passionate about.
Oh, absolutely. And I wouldn't have wanted you to be concise, because the reason why we do podcasts or write articles is to provide that nuance that social media doesn't offer. If we start being excessively concise everywhere, then there's nowhere where people can experience nuance. And how are they going to learn?
I completely agree. I'm just glad I haven't lost that skill set. So I'm definitely down for talking nutrition because, yeah, I think my mind has morphed on that one too, for sure.
Awesome. And since you haven't been on the podcast for a while, why don't you remind the audience of where they can find you and your coaching company, Revive Stronger?
For sure. Thank you. So if they head to revivestronger.com, they'll be able to find all our coaching services, everything we provide there. And also, Revive Stronger is our podcast. So I get to interview people just like yourself, Nikias, on a weekly basis and get to talk to some bright minds in the industry. So that's always a lot of fun. So if you enjoy this chat, you'll enjoy that too. I speak much less though. So
So if you didn't enjoy Steve talking, but you want to hear more from Mike Israel and Milo Wolf and Dr. Eric Helms, head over to his podcast where he shuts up and lets them talk.
yeah. And then I'm most present on Revive Stronger on Instagram. So if people want to see some of my short answers on stories or whatever, if they like that, then they can head over there. If their attention span isn't for a podcast, you probably wouldn't have made it to this point though.
Yeah, that's very true. So, dear listeners, if you're still around, I really want to thank you for being so generous with your time and for tuning in. And I will talk to you next time.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.